All right. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Jason Joyce. He is the publisher at Isthmus, an independent nonprofit news source in Madison, Wisconsin. Jason, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. I kind of start every podcast the same. I just love you could just tell me and the audience about your background and your kind of story in local media. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I grew up in Minneapolis, which is a great media town. Went to school at the University of Wisconsin here in Madison, and started working for the one of the school newspapers here. That's maybe some important context. People joke that Madison is like one of the most competitive media landscapes in the
Hmm.
country. There are two. They're not dailies anymore, but when I was in college, there were two daily newspapers. We each printed five copies a week and distributed up to 20,000 copies. So I got a taste for beating the competition and deadline pressure and all that stuff in college, which was great fun. Many of us tell those stories about how addictive that is. And at that time, I went to a national conference and heard from a guy there named Jay Waljasper, who was the editor of the Utne Reader, which in the early 90s, before the internet came along, was like a blog. It was like a collection of, it was called the Best of the Alternative Press. So it was a collection of stuff from newsletters and alternative weeklies from all over the country. And he really called attention to City Pages and Twin Cities Reader, where I grew up in Minneapolis, but also he shouted out Isthmus and Madison. And I had been using Isthmus to see where club shows were and stuff like that. I hadn't been really reading it up until that point, but he really admired it. And so that caused me to take a second look at it. Got an internship there, graduated from college and didn't really have much luck getting a job with a daily newspaper, and got a job working for the college bookstore actually, where they allowed me to learn how to build websites. And then that's how I got a job with Isthmus as the digital director in the late 90s, because they needed to upgrade their website. They thought they should have a digital person on staff. So I worked at Isthmus from 98 to 2013, running the digital department, which we grew from one person up to about five people. And then I left and worked for the Capital Times, which is the former Afternoon Daily, now a digital first daily news source here in Madison, as an editor, as the news editor. Got some really good experience there, just sort of working with reporters on stories, crafting beats, finding sources, the day to day of really being a news editor. That was great experience as well. And during COVID, Isthmus essentially went out of business. It had been a privately owned alt weekly newspaper since 1976, and more or less overnight lost its business model. Places that hosted concerts and events stopped doing that and stopped advertising. Everybody else took their feet off the brake, like restaurants, auto dealerships.
Hmm.
Everybody just said, "Whoa, we're going to hit pause." And so the former owners said, "Okay, we're not going, we can't take on this debt." A small group of staffers, many of them friends of mine, said, "We're going to try to keep this going on a volunteer basis," and looked into securing 501c3 status, which they achieved. The former owners donated all the IP to the
Wow.
organization, and I said I want in on that. I'd been reading a lot about the nonprofit model for news for years, and thought that it was a way forward. Um, so I joined in 2021, right before we printed our first issue back from the pandemic. We were out of print for about 18 months. And so we returned as a monthly, as a nonprofit. And that's the work I've been doing since 2021.
That's really cool. It's funny when you said you were kind of aware of Isthmus back years ago. That's my exact relationship I grew up in Denver with the Westward, the alt weekly in
Sure.
Denver. I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, what are the concerts? And I remember like flipping through it, or if I had a date, like maybe look up a fancy restaurant or something like that. But
Right.
and then growing up and getting further into this kind of space now, I realized what a good source that was. It also sounds like it's a really cool organization, both in that they were thinking about the digital transformation in the late 90s. It sounded like they were ahead of the curve on that,
Yeah.
and then just like them donating the IP after being able they couldn't run anymore. That sounds like it's a solid culture, solid organization there, and everything.
It, we get this and we talk about this more, but we really, I mean, it has a special Isthmus and Madison have a special relationship. Madison is, a little bit of an alternative community. It's a college town at its roots. And when Isthmus came along in the 70s, and it was free, and it was really the first news source in town that wrote about the things that people were doing in their free time, and treated the scene, so to speak, seriously. And a lot of people really fell in love with it that way. And so I think people have treated it in with special care, including it's only had a couple of different waves of owners. The founder, and then a group that bought from him in 2014, and then now we're the nonprofit.
Right. Yeah. I've never been to Madison. It always sounds like I want to go check it out.
Yeah.
I have a good friend whose dad actually played football at Wisconsin, and
Oh,
he's
for the Badgers.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's always he went on to have a kind of brief NFL career, but he's always talking about the glory days back there, and it sounds like a really cool town.
It is true that wherever you travel, you will run into Badgers
Yeah.
or, Madison people. And having worked for Isthmus, it's something that everyone loves to talk about. Like, oh, yeah, I used to
Yeah.
read Isthmus. I got dates out of the personal section, and they love it.
That sounds so like a bygone era, getting a date out of the personal section now, but
Definitely. Definitely.
um, cool. So really, it's like an old brand, Isthmus, but it's
Yep.
almost like a refreshed organization. It sounds like in the last couple of years. Could you talk about
And
like
that's,
almost sounds like you kind of got to rebuild it? You're the publisher. Could
yeah,
you talk about your day to day and like how you've kind of thought about post COVID, like moving into that? Yeah.
for sure. So yeah, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year, and that's something that we're rolling into. So yeah, we're juggling the old and the new
Right.
all at the same time now. I would say the biggest, sort of the biggest chunk of, making Isthmus stable as a nonprofit was we really sort of were, and this is something that the old owners probably felt like they couldn't do in many ways, but we were able to shed a lot of the sort of the bureaucratic weight that businesses accumulate over decades. um, and people ask me, they're like, well, how were you able to spin up the nonprofit? And I'm like, it's morbid to say this, but it sort of helps to go out of business. First of all, your audience, they realize what they missed. But secondly, we don't have a newsroom anymore. We don't rent an office space or, I mean, back in the day, Isthmus owned its own building in downtown Madison. So we don't have any of that stuff. We don't hire a receptionist. We don't have to worry about, it used to be a question like, boy, if we get rid of our receptionist, how are calls going to be handled? We don't deal with that. We don't care. It doesn't matter. People stopped sending stuff in the mail. So offices became a little more optional. So we're distributed. I work out of a startup space, like a shared workspace in downtown. And we hold staff meetings here, and people sort of pop in and out, but it's not really a dedicated, office environment. So day to day, I kind of check in here. Yeah, I'm still the person who does a lot of the like checking of the PO box, running to the bank, things like that. My job as publisher is, I mean, we're just 7 dedicated staff, and then we have a crew of about 30, between 30 and 50 freelance writers and artists. I work very closely with our editor, Judith Davidoff, and so she and I are in constant contact. She's often here working at a desk right next to mine. We're just coming off the our year-end fundraising drive, as we're a member of Institute for Nonprofit News, and we participate in their News Match fundraiser at the end of every year. And that's instrumental. That's been instrumental to our survival. We're about 30 to 35% reader support, and 60 to 65% um, advertising and sponsorship, with some grants. Depending on the year, that grant number sort of goes up and down.
Right.
So really a lot of my work has to do with dealing with those aspects of our revenue. Working on fundraising campaigns, accounting for that, sending out acknowledgement letters, being in touch with some of our major gift donors, managing grants to the degree that we're doing that. And then we have 2 folks working with us, one who's an independent contractor, and one who's on staff who deal with sponsorships and advertising. And I have advertising clients on my list, so calling on them. We're spinning up right now. Our paper comes out the first Thursday of every month, and so we're pulling our February issue together right now. So this morning has been a lot of either outbound sort of, hey, how does February look? You interested in getting an ad in the paper, to clients of mine. Like I have a couple of music clubs on my list. And so they're advertising every month, but you got to sort of check in with them. Hey, just making sure your ad's coming in. Let me know if you have any needs on the copy side. One of the more fun aspects, again, we're still an alt weekly at heart. Visited with one of my clients yesterday, which is THC isn't legal in Wisconsin like it is in Colorado, but we have these sort of hemp based weed shops. One of them, which is a few blocks from here, is called Dank of America. They have, but they have a lively art gallery and really are bringing in DJs and doing more and more in the event space. And so I went over and met with those guys yesterday and put together a little promotional campaign that will run with them for about a month and see how that goes, and hopefully sign them on as a long-term client after that.
That's cool. I'm not a THC user myself, but I always like the names. Dank of America. The next town up for me is Delta, Colorado, and they used to have one called
Oh,
Delta Dab and Doobie. And every time I drive
yeah.
by it, I started saying it till my toddler started repeating me. I'm like, I probably shouldn't keep saying that.
They have a sense of humor about their
Yeah,
business,
yeah,
and I appreciate that a lot.
yeah. So I didn't have this in the prep, but I'm just curious now. So you're an alt weekly. I'm sure you're still doing print, and then you've got the
Yes.
digital. What else do you do? Like newsletters, email, any other
Yeah.
formats or anything like that? Yeah.
It I think, as much as we're digital, we still are really focused on that print. And that's because when we came back, we talked to the audience, and admittedly a lot of our audience are baby boomers. Yeah. But there are also, younger folks who really appreciate the print. They really want it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are they going to be able to sustain it on a weekly basis? No, but they like it on a monthly basis. So we print 35,000 copies. We distribute them free all over the city, mostly in, grocery stores
Right.
and coffee shops, a little bit on the street, but that business has sort of gone away. We were dedicated to printing on good quality paper. So it's a little heavier. It's a little more permanent. I like to, like in the summertime, I like to put it on the porch test. Like I throw one down on this coffee table on my porch and see how long it lasts before it starts turning yellow and curling up. And it's good. It's got good staying power. So that's a significant part of our business. Probably, all told, if you factor in the the fundraising that we're able to do as a result of the print, it's probably just over 50% in terms of its importance. We have a lively website. We're putting new content up on the website all the time. Our staff writers really dedicated to, keeping that alive, but we repurpose all of our print content online. And we have a very active events calendar. Which has always been the backbone of our operation. But, we still want to be that place that you can go if you want to know what's going on around town, what's happening that night. And then like recently, it's been a place where folks can list their protests, their activist activities, because social media is letting them down on that front. They're not getting nearly as much attention by posting things to Facebook. So we're reviving that again and getting the word out on that. And then, yeah, we have 3 weekly email newsletters, one that's dedicated to arts and entertainment, one that's sort of a week in review and a note from our editor, Judy, and then one that's called uh, the name is escaping me right now. This is horrible, but it's basically a recommendation email, word of mouth. It's called.
There we go.
So it's like people on staff, our freelance writers, and even our advertisers recommending, like, pans they're using to cook with, shows they're streaming on Netflix, what podcasts they're listening to, books they're reading to, and that's really community minded. So that gets, like, I don't get any more feedback than I get if I write something in word of mouth. Both people sending the emails back, and friends of mine would be like, "Oh yeah, I saw that thing that you wrote on the email the other day." So that's a lot. That's most of our content. We do a little bit on social, talking about vertical video a little bit more. Sort of talked about and rejected the idea of a podcast just because of how much labor that is, and we don't really have the resources to pay for a quality production at this point. But
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. Social, you talked a couple times about social, and there is so frustrating with the activism, or even like you said, vertical video. Just
yeah,
like my issue with it, like here in town, is I'll literally be looking to see like events to take my kids to over the weekend, and I
yeah,
can't find it, and then it'll pop up in my feed 3 days after it happened. I'm like, this is
Yes,
not,
right.
it drives me insane. I'm like, come on, algorithms. I know you could fix that. Anyway, just a minor vent there. And thanks for indulging me. I think I didn't really think about this till we started talking. I think you're the first person from an all weekly I've had on. So it's really, sorry
Nice.
if I'm, you're indulging me in my curiosity just because I have a
It's
connection with, like I said, the Westward in Denver. And it's just,
it's a you know, it really the way alt weeklies functioned we just hosted this summer. We hosted the alt weekly, again weekly, like barely any of them are weeklies
yeah,
anymore, but
yeah.
the alternative news publishers convention here in Madison. And we talk a lot about how we are managing to stay in business, how we're making money. And that piece right there of looking for stuff to do again comes up again and again. For a while there, people who own nightclubs would say like, well, I don't know how much I need print advertising anymore. I can just put it out on Facebook. And the bands have their following, we have our following. We sell a lot of tickets that way. That algorithm changed, and then they realized they really needed to get back with us.
Mm-hmm.
Or they would tell us like, I can sell 80% of the room on social, but if I want to sell it out, which is the difference between profiting or
Right.
not profiting on a show, I need to blast it out. I need to make sure that casual people perk up their eyebrows and say, "Oh, that looks like something I might want to go to." And that's where we still do that job better than anyone else, I think.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a college town, I just have like
Yep.
memories of going to the Chipotle or a coffee shop, like you said, and just browsing. Oh, well, I didn't know they were coming.
Right.
Yeah, it's just super relevant and important to the audience. Good stuff. Good.
Alternative newspapers have been a burrito placemat for
I
decades, and
associate
we're
it with
we're happy
Chipotle.
about that.
I don't know why.
Yes.
It's just in my head that
No,
way.
you're not
That's
the only
that's
one.
funny. That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did see this quote, this thing I pulled up on your LinkedIn when I was kind of putting this stuff together that I wanted to ask you about
Yeah.
because I found it really interesting. And you put up a post recently about Meta's, we're talking about social already, their $70 billion with a B metaverse project that they're basically rolling up now. Zuckerberg went
Yeah.
all in, changed the name of the company and everything. And they're like, yeah, that's not going to work or it's not the right time. And about how
Right.
advertisers should realize that maybe projects like that are where a lot of their money is going. Like if you're talking to me and I'm a concert promoter or a local restaurant or what have you, how would you make the case to a local business to, I mean, we've kind of talked about this already, but how would you talk to them about, the value that you guys provide? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean and this is what we've heard too. Back in the day when in the heyday of alternative papers, when we were making a lot of money off of personals and classified advertising, we were able to do market studies and see who's reading us and what their habits. I mean, we would be able to tell our advertisers like 60% of our readers plan on buying a washer or dryer in the next 3 years. That kind of information. We don't have access to that anymore. So it is harder for us to sit down with data and explain the value of what we do. But in a city like Madison, there are a lot of people that we talk to who just intrinsically understand the value of local news. And they've seen what's happened to the Daily, where the number of reporters they have has been on a steep decline now for many years. The Daily here is owned by Lee Enterprises, which has had its share of troubles.
Mm-hmm.
They just know, they pay attention, so they see what's going on in the local news universe and they don't want to lose it. So some of what we're selling them is, if you just think it's important to have us around, you can help us, be sustainable. And by the way, you can get some promotion for your business, as well, which
Mm-hmm.
is effective. So that's been really good. But yeah, I think that, especially when you talk about local retailers, my wife is a local retailer, they really get local, you know, ecosystem, people helping other people, and how she owns a pet supply store. And when we walk through the neighborhood and she sees like a Chewy box sitting on a porch, she's like, so I think that really resonates with a lot of those businesses. And my take on Facebook has always been, or any sort of social advertising, is what you're paying for is the dashboard, right? Or the targeting. So you're able to say, hey, I want to hit everybody between these ages in this zip code, or with these demographic habits. I get a dashboard that shows me exactly how many people and what people are looking at my ad and stuff. But do you know that it works? Like, that those people are seeing your ad, but are they actually driving business and repeat business and loyal customers to your store? You just probably don't. It's just like any other form of advertising. Part of it, works, but you don't know which part.
Yeah.
And at least with us, that all the money that you spend with your advertising with Isthmus stays in the community. You know what it supports. You know it supports our journalism, which is hyper local and really attentive to the needs of our readers. I just think it's important to remind people of that. It's like what I've said about that too is, nobody thought the metaverse was a good idea when they saw those like Weeble figures. They're like, well, this
Right.
is weird. I'm not going to do this. Everybody thinks local news is a good idea. The studies have been done across the political spectrum, across the socioeconomic spectrum. Everybody thinks it's important to have reporters go into city council meetings, talking to state government officials, paying attention to local business, arts and entertainment. Your area needs to be covered. And most people admit, like, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. I'm not sure Facebook is a good idea anymore for anybody.
Right. Yeah. So first of all, kudos on your wife to the pet supply thing. There's a pet
Yeah,
shop in my town. It is my favorite local business. They were so awesome and so great. My dog actually passed away about a year ago. R.I.P. Bandit.
I'm
So I don't get to
sorry.
go in there anymore. It's okay. It's been a year. I can talk about it without tearing up anymore.
Right,
Anyway,
right.
they were like a great local business. I
Yeah,
oppose Chewy also. But
good.
what you were saying about data, it's funny. I was just having a conversation earlier with someone, and they were saying like we're getting to the point where you can't really trust it anyway. For example, I
Right.
have a newsletter on the local news industry, and I have like good open rates, 50-60% open rates. But if you look at like the chart when I go in there, I send it out at 4 a.m. Mountain Time where I am, which is 6 a.m. on the East Coast, and like 80% of the opens are at 4 a.m. on the dot. I'm like,
Yeah,
are these people
right.
really? I just don't trust many of the numbers,
I
especially
agree.
I don't trust Zuckerberg as far as I could throw him. And so,
Right.
that's why you always hear like local news is dead, local news is dying. I totally disagree. I think local news almost become like the gatekeeper to all the AIs of the world and everything, where, you have that connection to Main Street.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, we did, yeah, we're going to talk about I think, but that's the corporation that, Lee Enterprises that owns the Daily in
Hmm.
town. We reported on them this summer. They had a reporter who essentially, you know, crafted a story completely using AI, and it was
Yeah.
about 70% hallucination made up. That was the top story on their newspaper on Sunday.
Jeez.
And the only way anybody would have really known that was, I mean, literally, I was sitting on my porch reading the story going, I've never heard of that coffee shop. And there's no way this is happening, and started looking into it a little more. And the editor and I started asking questions. We ended up publishing a few stories, talked to the reporter and things. And yeah,
Yeah.
nobody else is watchdog in that
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, exactly. That's crazy that got through. That there's no,
It is
you
crazy.
know what I mean? To that, I've seen
Yeah.
similar, I've seen similar stories. I think there's one in Wyoming, kind of close to here, a year or two ago. Just complete fabrication, like made up businesses, made up people that
Yeah.
they're quoting. It's nuts. I guess
It is. Yeah. It's
I
what,
guess a good time to pivot into the AI thing. My obligatory,
yeah.
because it's 2026 AI question. So I
Yeah.
like to ask people their overall thoughts on AI, and it's kind of I might get rid of that question because it's kind of hard. The way I view it is
Yes.
like going back 100 years, be like, do you think electricity is good or bad? It's like, well,
Right.
it's going to be a lot of things. Like, so people are going to get shocked, but there'll be hospitals operating and stuff too. So, what are your
Right.
thoughts as it is right now? Are you guys using any tools or using it for efficiencies or what's your thoughts there? Yeah.
We use it in a very limited way, as I'm sure as much as many people do for, productivity, right? We
Mm-hmm.
have to remind ourselves like, oh, if I'm writing an email and I use, the recommended few words to end a sentence, that's AI. So, do that. We had in the wake of the story that we reported about the local daily, we had a couple of meetings with a professor here at the university who has come in, and he's studying AI in journalism, and he is helping us devise an AI policy. And that policy will be really important to communicate to our readers, but it was a really good opportunity for us to all sit around a table and just really talk about it and
Mm-hmm.
talk about how we're going to talk about it, right? Like we had just yesterday we talked in a meeting. One of our reporters was interviewing a tailor in town who's from Syria, and he speaks very broken English. And so she was using Google Translate to, speak with him. That's AI.
Mm.
We trust Google Translate. It's one of the, more established versions of AI, I think, that's out there. So those are the way, we really use it. We are not feeding stories into, we feed stories into Chat GPT. We are not feeding stories into Chat GPT to say, hey, edit this.
Right.
Hey, fact check this. Hey, do this to it. Sometimes we feed a story in if it's the fourth story we've read that afternoon and say, can you suggest like 5 pithy headlines for this story? And what's funny is when we talk about it, we're like, we never use any of those headlines, but it does,
Yep.
adjust your thinking a little bit to the point it sparks something where you can say, oh, okay, now I feel like I can work on that. So we're skeptical, we're questioning. But the other interesting thing, just because of where I work here with a bunch of startups, I mean, I'm surrounded by coders and entrepreneurs who in many cases are building software using AI to code, or specific it's a specific AI usage. So these conversations we're having all the time, and those guys know I'm skeptical, and so they're not trying to necessarily win me over, but they're suggesting or giving me examples of things that we might use it for. One recent test case is using it to like comb through the state legislature's website to say, what are the committee hearings this week? What are the bills that will be discussed in committee this week? So, you know, we're getting there,
Yeah.
I think.
I think I,
But yeah, right now, skeptical still.
I think having a policy is a really good idea, and a
Yeah.
lot of the use cases you used, I agree with the headline thing. It's really helps me, even with like titles of the
Yeah.
podcast. I don't always use them verbatim, but I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that. That's a cool idea to follow down, and then just the transcription, translation, stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure.
I think part of the thing with AI is bad branding. If it wasn't called artificial intelligence, if it was just called some new kind of software, which is what it is, I think it'd be a different
Right.
conversation around it. And yeah, because I mean, autocorrect on Google is an early AI, and that's
For sure.
super helpful. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um,
I know, right now with I mean, we're seeing a lot of political clashing going on just over the data centers in Wisconsin right now.
hmm,
So that affects the brand too, right? They're like, what are we doing this for? So that we can like slurp water out of the Great Lakes and
right,
drive everybody's energy bill higher? Like this is all, and it's all part of the conversation. It's, would you send a reporter on a plane to England to get a quote that you could get in an
right,
email? No.
right.
So, these are important considerations.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, I agree with all that. Okay, this other question I've been asking everybody. I might switch it a little bit for you because, like I said, you're the first alt weekly person I've had on. So, flash
Yeah.
forward 5 years. We all know the issues that local news and alt weeklies are included in that have had over the last couple decades. Where do you see alt weeklies maybe as kind of a separate industry headed, and you and Isthmus in particular? Like, where do you see it going in the next 5 years? Probably not going anywhere. How do you see it evolving?
I would like to think we're not going anywhere. Since 2021, since we came back as a nonprofit, our revenue has gone up every year. We've increased on both sides of the, advertising, sponsorship, and reader revenue. At this point, we've got members who have been with us for 5 years. So that's very, very powerful. There's also, among the, not to get too in the weeds on nonprofits, but we're entering this era that they're calling it the greatest transfer of wealth in the history of the world, from the baby
Mm-hmm.
boomers to their children or to the organizations that they care about and want to leave a legacy gift to. So we're having all of those conversations, and I think everyone, on our board and on our staff feels very hopeful and optimistic about this, business model that we've managed to carve out. And it is a hell of a motivator to, during the news match period, having people seeing the checks come in, seeing the online donations
Mm-hmm.
climb and climb. And that's everything from, literally, we will get checks for $5 saying thank you, keep on doing what you're doing, to folks who are like, thinking about giving a gift, is $2,500, useful for you? Like,
Right. Yes.
of
Yes.
course. Thank you very much. Yes. So, that stuff is gives me a lot of hope. Local businesses have been very receptive as well. So I really do feel good about it. And on the readership side, like I said before, certainly baby boomers love to read things in print. I do as well. I'm 55, so I'm getting up there, but I still really like to read a book and flip through a magazine and read a newspaper. But we have one interesting aspect of our business is our art director works with local artists to
Mm,
illustrate the covers every month. And they don't always have something to do with the story inside. Sometimes it's just very, whimsical, it's seasonal
right.
maybe. So I hear probably once every other month from somebody who says, I'm collecting copies of
Ah,
Isthmus
cool.
and I don't know what happened to April. Can I get one? Like, yeah, for sure. Let's meet. You can come to the office or whatever, and I'll get you a copy. And they're always under 30.
Huh.
So they really care about, and I talked to a publisher too. He was like, I sort of take these secret cell phone photos of young people in coffee shops reading our newspaper because I want to prove to people that it actually happens. So, those are all things that really make me feel optimistic about it. So yeah, I feel good about where we are. And I do also feel like, you talked about, our former publisher who was really embracing the internet in the 90s and before that really embraced personals ads like we talked about. Our company really went through a phase where we did a lot with events, when we had this much larger organization, more profitable, putting on really big events in the city. So we keep trying to adapt and succeeding with adapting and having our eyes on the horizon a little more. And I mean, I think that because we don't own a printing press, because we don't have to subsidize this huge foundation of infrastructure, that we can move a little bit faster.
Hmm.
And so I feel optimistic because of that too.
Yeah, you're a great case study for. I've had a lot of people on that go against the local news is crumbling to the ground narrative out there, and you're a great
Yeah.
case study because you were an existing brand, kind of got the phoenix out of the ashes treatment after COVID,
Yeah.
and your revenues increased every year because you can start. It's
Yes.
like getting a new old brand, and you get to kind of do things a different way and embrace new tools, be leaner and more agile like that. And
It is. Then, the generational thing matters too.
yeah,
Kids in this city grew up in households where our paper was always out on the coffee table. And so even if they don't consume it as closely, as their parents did, they get the value of it
right,
and they want to be in the paper. All the artists we deal with are young. They love being on the cover.
huh?
They love it. And they really feel emotional about it. That's very cool to see.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear. It's just something I wouldn't know without talking to people like you.
Yeah, yeah, what this podcast is teaching me too. Well, and I talk about this all the time. Like 30 years ago, if you ran an alt weekly, it pretty much your business model looked very similar to every other alt weekly in the country. It was just a matter of scale
Hmm.
and size. But your revenue breakdown, it was like if you're not making X% from classifieds, you need to change that. You need to add another rep or something like that. Your pie chart of revenue needs to work a certain way or it won't be profitable. And now none of them look the same. We're all completely different. Everybody's doing different things that work in their market. And the same is true on the nonprofit news side. I talk to people all the time who are running a monthly email newsletter or I'm sitting here in our startup spaces, Wisconsin Watch, which is a statewide nonprofit news network. That model didn't even exist 20 years ago.
Right.
So they're figuring it out as they go. They're really interesting to talk to. There's a CityCast operation in this building as well. And that's another thing that didn't exist. So everybody's got to be innovative, right?
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Jason, I've gone through all my stuff, all my questions. This has been great.
And it's been, yeah, really, really good questions. And it's fun to talk about this stuff.
Where can people find you and Isthmus? What do you want me to link to or point people to or anything?
You can find us at isthmus.com. We're on Isthmus Madison is on Instagram. We do quite a bit on Instagram as well. Watch out for our TikTok. Half kidding.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll link to all the stuff and everything.
Great.
And or if you're in Madison, just go to Chipotle, right? And
Yes, right,
find you
right.
there. Awesome, Jason. Thank you so much. This was great. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Paul.
Yep.